Eleanor Vance stood by the sliding glass door, a linen curtain clutched tight in her hand. The afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, now felt like an unwelcome spotlight illuminating the undeniable evidence. Wet footprints, still glistening faintly on the flagstones, led directly from the shimmering blue rectangle of her pool to the back gate, which, as always, was slightly ajar. Next to a potted fern, a crumpled soda can lay like a discarded taunt. It wasn't just the physical intrusion. It was the audacious carelessness, the blatant disregard for her space, her privacy, her peace. A year ago, this house had been a haven, a shared dream with Arthur. The pool, his pride and joy, was where they spent lazy weekends, his booming laughter echoing across the water as he coaxed her into a reluctant dip. Now every ripple felt like an invasion, every splash a violation of a silence she had painstakingly rebuilt since his passing. She was 56, a widow, and this sprawling property, once vibrant with shared life, now felt overwhelmingly vast and terrifyingly porous. She had tried everything the local sheriff's deputy, a young, well-meaning man, named Miller, had suggested. "Signs, Mrs. Vance," he'd advised, his voice earnest. "No trespassing signs are your first line of defense." She'd put them up. Large, red-lettered warnings nailed to the fence posts, visible from every approach. They'd been ignored. Then came the lock on the back gate. A sturdy, rust-resistant padlock that had been pried open, not once but 3 times. Each time, Eleanor replaced it, a grim determination setting in, only to find it breached again, a silent, aggravating testament to the trespasser's persistence. Her neighbors, the elderly couple across the street, offered commiseration but little practical help. "Kids these days," Mrs. Henderson had clucked, shaking her head. "No respect. Maybe a dog, dear." But Eleanor, still grieving, still finding her footing in a world without Arthur, couldn't fathom the responsibility of another living creature. Besides, a dog wouldn't stop them. These weren't petty thieves, they were opportunists, thrill-seekers, who saw her empty house, her sparkling pool, as an open invitation. She knew who they were, or at least she had a pretty good idea. A group of teenagers from the newer development on the far side of the woods. They cut through the old logging trail, emerging onto her property like phantom swimmers, leaving behind only the telltale dampness and the faint scent of chlorine, mixed with something sweet, cheap cologne maybe, or sugary sodas. She'd caught glimpses, sun-kissed skin, brightly colored swim trunks, the flash of dark hair, always laughing, always boisterous. Their joy felt like a direct affront to her quiet sorrow. Tonight, she wouldn't just observe. Tonight, she would confront. Armed with a newfound resolve, Eleanor waited. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The air grew cooler, but a sticky humidity lingered, promising a hot night. She turned off the exterior lights, allowing the property to sink into an inky twilight. The only illumination came from the subtle glow of the pool's underwater lights, casting a hypnotic, inviting blue. She positioned herself in the dense azalea, bushes near the back fence, the thorny branches scraping against her jeans. The mosquitoes, a nuisance she usually abhorred, were an insignificant detail tonight. Her heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against her ribs. Fear mingled with a potent cocktail of anger and a strange, unfamiliar anticipation. This wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about her space, her autonomy, her very right to feel safe in her own home. Arthur would have known what to do. Arthur would have confronted them, his imposing presence enough to send them scattering. But Arthur was gone. And Eleanor, the woman who had always deferred, always sought consensus, was on her own. The rustling came first, faint at the edge of the woods. Then the low murmur of voices growing louder, more confident. Three figures emerged from the shadows, easily scaling the low back fence, ignoring the no trespassing signs that were now barely visible in the dim light. Jax, she recognized him instantly. The leader, with his lanky frame and a swagger that spoke of unchallenged entitlement. Beside him was a girl, her long hair pulled into a messy bun, and another boy, broader, quieter. "Clear," Jax whispered, though his voice carried, echoing a little too loudly in the quiet night. He dropped his backpack onto the pristine pool deck, a jarring thud that made Eleanor wince. "Looks like Grandma's asleep, Grandma." The word stung, a dismissive jab that twisted the knife of her indignation. The girl, Chloe, giggled. "Or out getting her early bird special." They peeled off their clothes, revealing swimsuits underneath. Jax was the first into the water. A cannonball. Splash sending water cascading over the edge, drenching the deck she had just had meticulously cleaned. The sound was like a thunderclap in the oppressive silence of Eleanor's vigil. "Woo! This is the life!" Jax yelled, kicking his legs, sending more spray into the air. "Seriously, why bother with public pools when this masterpiece is just sitting here?" The other boy, Mike, was more cautious, easing himself into the water. "Someone's gonna catch us eventually, man." "Nah," Jack scoffed, backstroking lazily. "Old Mrs. Vance? She's harmless. Put up a few signs, locked a few gates. Nothing a little elbow grease can't fix. Besides, what's she gonna do? Call the cops? They've been here 3 times. They don't care." Eleanor felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. He was right. Deputy Miller had, with growing politeness, informed her that unless there was actual damage or theft, trespassing was a low priority, a nuisance, not a crime warranting dedicated surveillance. They knew they were untouchable. This wasn't just recklessness. It was calculated defiance. She watched them swim, their laughter echoing, their youthful energy a stark contrast to her. Weary bones. They played a game of Marco Polo, their shouts of "Marco" and "Polo" piercing the quiet night. Chloe splashed Mike, and he retaliated, sending a torrent of water directly towards the perfectly manicured rose bushes near the pool. Eleanor saw red, not the roses, but the carefully tended blossoms Arthur had loved, now shaking under the onslaught of chlorinated water. "Hey, Jax, look!" Chloe pointed to the small, tasteful fountain that trickled water into the main pool. "Isn't that, like, expensive?" Jax squinted. "Probably. Who cares? It's not ours." He pushed off the edge, gliding towards the fountain, his fingers trailing along its stone base. Eleanor saw a glint in his eye, a mischievous spark that spoke of more than just innocent fun. He was looking for trouble, for a way to push the boundaries, to assert his dominance over this forbidden territory. He grabbed the small decorative stone cherub that sat at the edge of the fountain, a gift from Arthur on their 25th anniversary. It wasn't valuable, not in monetary terms, but it was imbued with years of memories, of quiet shared moments. "Think this thing would make a good frisbee?" Jax grinned, hefting the cherub in his hand. "Dude, don't," Mike said, a hint of genuine unease in his voice. "That's actual vandalism." "Relax, Mike," Jax said, but his eyes were on Chloe, gauging her reaction. He liked to perform for her, Eleanor realized. A sickening surge of insight. He was showing off. Just seeing if it floats. He pulled his arm back, preparing to hurl the cherub across the pool. A guttural sound escaped Eleanor's throat, a strangled gasp of outrage. But it was too late. Before she could move, before she could even process the image, Jax had thrown. The cherub arced through the air, glinting under the pool lights, and then smashed against the far-tiled edge with a sickening crack. A piece of the cherub, a wing, broke off, sinking slowly into the blue depths. The sound was sharp, final. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the gentle gurgle of the fountain, which now seemed to weep. Jax's grin faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then a shrug. Oops. Guess it doesn't float. He looked at Chloe, who was staring at the broken cherub, her expression unreadable. Mike just looked down at the water, shaking his head. Eleanor's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so pure and white-hot it stole her breath. This wasn't just trespassing, it was desecration. It was a direct assault on her grief, on Arthur's memory. The lesson Deputy Miller had suggested, cameras, better locks, polite requests, none of it mattered to these children. They understood only one language: consequence. She watched them for a few more minutes, her mind racing, forming a plan that was both desperate and exhilarating. They continued to swim, though the laughter was subdued now, a pall cast over their illicit fun. Jax eventually retrieved the main body of the cherub, placing it gingerly on the deck, as if that could undo the damage. It couldn't. As they finally climbed out, wrapped towels around themselves, and slipped back through the gate, their hushed goodbyes starkly different from their earlier bravado, Eleanor didn't move. The chill of the night seeped into her bones, but her resolve was afire. She waited until the sounds of their departure faded completely, until the house was swallowed once more by the profound silence. Then slowly, deliberately, Eleanor rose from the azalea bushes. She walked to the pool deck, her gaze fixed on the broken cherub. She picked up the two pieces, holding the smooth, cool stone in her trembling hands. The wing, separated from its body, felt impossibly light, like a fragment of a forgotten dream. She looked at the pool, no longer just a source of frustration but a canvas, a stage. They thought she was harmless, a grandma easily The morning after the cherub's desecration was crisp and clear, a stark contrast to the stormy resolve brewing within Eleanor. She woke before dawn, the broken pieces of stone still heavy in her palm, their coolness a physical anchor to her renewed purpose. The silence of the house was different now, no longer just a reminder of loss, but a quiet space for strategy. She made coffee, strong and black, and sat at the kitchen table, overlooking the still blue expanse of the pool. The cherub's wing lay on the table beside her, a miniature monument to violated trust. Her first thought had been vengeance, raw and furious, calling the police again, demanding action, perhaps even installing electric fencing. But Deputy Miller's words echoed, "Unless there's actual damage or theft," and the teenager's sneering confidence, "What's she gonna do? Call the cops? They don't care." They weren't just defying her, they were defying the system, confident in its inability to touch them. A conventional response would only solidify their belief in their invincibility. Eleanor needed something unconventional, something personal, a lesson that resonated not with legal codes, but with their youthful sense of entitlement. She began her research not with legal texts, but with her old gardening books. Arthur had been an avid horticulturist, his library filled with volumes on everything from rare orchids to common pests. She remembered a casual conversation years ago about natural deterrents for nuisance animals, deer, rabbits, raccoons. Her eyes scanned the indexes, eventually landing on a chapter about plant-based irritants and their safe application. An idea began to bloom, insidious and brilliant. The plan formed slowly, meticulously, like the unfolding petals of a carnivorous plant. It had to be subtle, untraceable, yet undeniably effective. It couldn't be harmful, not truly. She wasn't a monster, but it had to be deeply, profoundly unpleasant. She spent the better part of the day at a specialized gardening supply store, a place Arthur had frequented, now feeling alien and overwhelming. She felt the eyes of the staff on her, a woman in her late 50s, meticulously inspecting various organic compounds, asking surprisingly specific questions about their effects on skin and eyes. She purchased what she needed, her basket filled, with innocuous-looking sprays and powders, each one a tiny component of her burgeoning arsenal. Upon returning home, she worked with a quiet intensity. First, she retrieved the large industrial-strength pool vacuum, a beast Arthur had insisted on for keeping the pool pristine. She ran it for hours, meticulously cleaning every inch of the pool, paying special attention to the deep end where the cherub's broken wing had sunk. She even donned Arthur's old diving mask and snorkel, her movements awkward and slow, to retrieve the last shard. The pool had to be immaculate, a sparkling trap. Then came the application. Under the cover of twilight, just as the first stars began to prickle the deepening blue, Eleanor moved with purpose. She used a small battery-operated sprayer, a tool she usually reserved for misting her orchids. With surgical precision, she applied a fine, almost invisible mist to the concrete lip of the pool, the ladder rungs, the handles of the deck chairs, even the surface of the pool itself. The substances she used were all natural, organic, and perfectly legal. On their own, harmless. In combination, in a certain environment, they would create an unforgettable sensation. The key, she knew, was the chlorine. Chlorine, mixed with her. Carefully selected natural compounds would undergo a subtle chemical reaction. It wouldn't turn the water green or create a visible film. It wouldn't smell off. But to anyone with bare skin, anyone who dared to dive into its inviting depths, it would be a very different story. As she finished wiping down her sprayer, a thrill ran through her. Not the hateful, vengeful thrill she might have expected, but a cold, satisfying sense of control. She walked back to the sliding door, not looking over her shoulder. This time there was no fear, no indignation. Only a quiet, unwavering resolve. She turned on the exterior lights, flooding the deck with a bright, almost clinical glow. Let them see it. Let it beckon. Eleanor sat in the living room, a book open on her lap, but her eyes were fixed on the pool. The waiting was the hardest part, a slow-motion tightening of the spring. It was nearly 9 p.m. when she heard them. This time, they weren't trying to be quiet. Confident in their routine, their whispers were almost celebratory. "See, still unlocked," Jax's voice, smug and familiar, drifted from the backyard. "Told you she'd give up," Chloe giggled. "Or she forgot." "Doesn't matter," Jax retorted. "It's ours tonight." Eleanor heard the familiar thud of his backpack, the careless clatter of discarded clothes. She gripped her book tighter. Her heart beat. A rapid tattoo against her ribs. This was it. She heard the splash. 1, 2, 3. They were all in. For a few moments, there was the familiar sound of splashing and laughter, perhaps a little more subdued tonight after yesterday's incident with the cherub. But then, the laughter began to change. "Whoa! What the hell?" Jax's voice, usually so confident, was laced with an unexpected edge. "Dude, my skin," Mike groaned. "It feels prickly." "Yeah, mine too," Chloe chimed in, her voice rising in alarm. "It's like 1,000 tiny needles." Eleanor allowed herself a small, grim smile. "The first wave, the initial contact, it was working. What is this? Poison ivy water?" Jax coughed, a wet, sputtering sound. "My eyes are burning! Get out! Get out!" The splashing became frantic, desperate. Shouts of discomfort, mixed with genuine panic, filled the night. Eleanor imagined them scrambling out, their bare skin burning, their eyes watering, the pristine pool suddenly a source of torture. The thought brought no joy, only a quiet, resolute satisfaction. She heard a loud clatter as someone slipped on the wet deck. "Mike, you okay?" Chloe's voice was sharp with concern. "My feet are on fire, man. What did she do?" Mike yelled, his voice strained. "It's like itching everywhere." "Whoa, look at my arm!" Chloe cried out. "It's all red." Eleanor remained still listening. She imagined their faces, contorted not just by discomfort, but by confusion. This wasn't a warning. It was an experience, a deeply unpleasant, unforgettable experience. "This is insane," Jack sputtered, his usual swagger completely gone. "We gotta get out of here." She heard the frantic rustling as they fumbled for their clothes, their previous carelessness replaced by a desperate urgency. There were more thuds, more groans of discomfort. The sounds of their frantic retreat were far less boisterous then, their arrival punctuated by gasps and sharp intakes of breath. "I need a shower, like, now!" Chloe wailed, her voice high-pitched. "Don't touch anything!" Jax ordered, his voice laced with the kind of fear Eleanor hadn't heard from him before. "Just go! Go! Go!" The gate creaked open, then slammed shut. The sounds of their hurried footsteps receded into the night, faster than ever before. There was no casual chatting, no triumphant whispers, only the fading sounds of their increasingly desperate escape. Eleanor waited for several minutes after the last sound vanished. The pool, once again, was still. The underwater lights cast their inviting blue glow, but the illusion of serenity was shattered. She rose, walked to the sliding door, and peered out. On the deck there were no wet footprints leading back to the gate this time, only the scattered, crumpled towels they had abandoned in their haste, and a single, discarded flip-flop near. The steps, a forgotten relic of their panicked retreat. The silence that settled over the property was profound, a different kind of silence this time. It wasn't the silence of grief, or the silence of ignored warnings. It was the silence of a lesson delivered. And for Eleanor, it was the sound of her peace, slowly, tentatively, beginning to return. But she knew this wasn't over. Not yet. This was merely the first strike. The real turning point would be whether they understood why this had happened, or if they would simply escalate their defiance. The three teenagers met at Jax's house, not in the usual triumphant huddle before a new conquest, but in a frantic, itching, and frankly terrified post-mortem. Mike's usually placid face was blotchy red, his arms covered in raised welts. Chloe's eyes were still watering, and she kept dabbing at them with a tissue. Jax, the self-proclaimed leader, was pacing his bedroom, scratching at his neck with a ferocity that threatened to tear his skin. The air in the room was thick with a shared, bewildered misery. "I'm telling you, it was poison," Mike insisted, his voice a low growl of discomfort. He'd spent an hour under a cold shower, but the infernal prickling sensation persisted, now accompanied by an angry, localized rash. "That old lady did something. She poisoned the water." "No way, man," Jax countered, though his tone lacked its usual conviction. He paused his pacing, digging his nails into his scalp. "It's a public health hazard if she did. The cops would be all over it." "The cops don't care about trespassing," Chloe reminded him, her voice hoarse from crying. She was trying to soothe her burning eyes with chilled cucumber slices, but the relief was minimal. "Why would they care about us getting some kind of chemical burn?" She shivered. "My skin feels like it's crawling." "It's not a chemical burn," Jax said, trying to sound authoritative, but a tremor in his voice betrayed his own fear. His entire body felt like it had been dunked in a vat of stinging nettles. Every breath felt like inhaling microscopic shards of glass. It's a reaction to something." They sat in silence for a moment, the unspoken question hanging, heavy in the humid air. What reaction? And why them? "What if it's permanent?" Mike asked, his voice barely a whisper, his eyes wide with genuine panic. He looked at his reddened arms, then at Chloe's tear-streaked face, then at Jax, hoping for an answer, for reassurance that their reckless fun hadn't cost them something irreparable. Jax stared at his own burning hands. The thrill of their illicit swims, the rush of adrenaline, it had all evaporated, replaced by a visceral horror. He was the one who had always pushed the boundaries, the one who had assured them Eleanor Vance was harmless. Now the harmless old lady had struck back, and she hadn't even lifted a finger. Just the pool, the damn, sparkling blue pool. "We need to figure out what it was," Jax finally said, his bravado returning, albeit with a new desperate edge. "And then we need to do something about it. This can't just stand." Chloe pulled the cucumber slices from her eyes, wincing. "Do something? Like what? Go back and get poisoned again?" "No, not go back," Jack snapped, a fresh wave of itching making him irritable. "We need information. Mike, remember that cherub? The one I threw?" Mike nodded slowly. "Yeah, why?" "It was just a cheap stone thing, right?" "No big deal," Jack said, but even as he said it, a cold dread snaked through him. "But she had signs. We broke her gate. We messed up her fountain, and then the cherub. That was personal. I saw it on her porch once. She always watered the flowers around it." A new theory began to form, chilling and unsettling. This wasn't a random occurrence. This was targeted. This was retribution. "You think she did this on purpose?" Chloe asked, her voice barely audible. Her initial panic began to morph into something darker, a creeping sense of violation, a personal attack. Jax didn't answer immediately. He remembered the feeling of the water, so normal, so inviting for the first few seconds. Then the burn, the prickle, the overwhelming urge to flee. It had been too precise, too specific. This wasn't an accident. This was a message. And the messenger was Eleanor Vance. "We need to go back," Jax declared, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. "Are you insane?" Mike shot up, forgetting his itching for a moment. "No way. Not a chance. My skin still feels like it's trying to crawl off my body." "Not to swim, you idiot!" Jax growled, rubbing his arm furiously. "We go back. We watch. We find out what she did. And then we make her pay." There was a dangerous glint in his eyes, a shift from fear to something more venomous. The humiliation, the discomfort, the sheer audacity of being outsmarted by an old lady. It fueled a new, darker anger. He hadn't just been inconvenienced. He had been bested. They spent the next day trying to self-diagnose their symptoms, poring over internet, forums about allergic reactions, strange rashes, and waterborne irritants. Nothing quite fit. The doctors, when they eventually convinced their parents to take them, were equally baffled, prescribing creams for dermatitis and eye drops for irritation, but unable to pinpoint a cause. "Did you come into contact with anything unusual?" the doctor asked, raising an eyebrow. They all lied, mumbled something about a pond, a public park. The humiliation of admitting to trespassing and then being poisoned by the homeowner was too much to bear. The rashes eventually subsided, the itching faded, but the memory, the stinging, vivid sensation remained. A phantom itch, a lingering fear. And with it, a simmering resentment. That evening, as dusk bled into night, they found themselves back at the edge of the woods bordering Eleanor Vance's property. This time, they wore long sleeves, gloves, even cheap goggles. They felt absurd, like commandos on a covert mission, but the fear of another attack was too strong to ignore. They crept through the undergrowth, quieter, more cautious than before. No loud chatter, no confident swagger. They hugged the tree, line peering through the dense foliage towards Eleanor's house. The pool glowed, a siren call in the twilight, but tonight it held no allure, only dread. Eleanor, unbeknownst to them, was sitting at her kitchen table sipping tea, a comfortable silence enveloping her. She knew they would return, not to swim, perhaps, but to observe, to figure it out. That was the crucial step, understanding. Because without understanding the why, the lesson would be incomplete. She had placed a discreet motion-activated camera, one Arthur had used for wildlife photography, aimed subtly at the back gate. It wasn't about catching them for the police. It was about knowing when her students were present. Hours passed. The Teenagers, hunkered down in the mosquito-ridden bushes, grew restless. Mike's legs cramped. Chloe shivered, despite the warm night air. Jax, however, was fixated, his gaze unwavering on the house, on the pool. He saw the faint outline of Eleanor, Vance moving in her living room, a silhouette against the warm lamplight. She seemed so calm, so utterly undisturbed. It grated on him. "She's just watching TV, man," Mike whispered, boredom creeping into his voice. "She's not doing anything." "She's waiting," Jax muttered, convinced. "She knows we're here. Or she expects us. She's smart, man. Smarter than we thought." Then Eleanor did something. Slowly, deliberately, she walked to the sliding glass door. She paused there for a long moment, looking directly at the pool. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. Then she reached down and, with a swift, confident motion, locked the door. The distinct click echoed in the oppressive stillness of the night, a sound that carried, sharp and clear, to the huddled teenagers. It was a small gesture, almost meaningless, but to Jax, it was an act of profound defiance. It was as if she was saying, "I know you're there, and you can't touch me." Just as she turned away from the door, her eyes, for a split second, seemed to glance directly into the shadows where they hid. It was too quick, too fleeting to be certain, but in Jax's mind, it was a direct challenge. A triumphant gaze, she knew. She had known all along. The air grew heavy with unspoken implications. The game had changed. This wasn't just about a pool anymore. It was about pride. It was about dominance. It was about who would back down first. And Jax, despite the phantom itching and the lingering fear, knew it wouldn't be him. A new, more dangerous resolve solidified in his gut. They hadn't just been taught a lesson, they had been issued a challenge. And Jax wasn't one to refuse. Jax's new resolve simmered, a dark, potent brew in his gut. The humiliation of the itching, the fear, the defeat, it all coalesced into a singular burning desire for payback. Eleanor Vance hadn't just defended her property, she had mocked them. That smirk, that deliberate lock of the door, it was a gauntlet thrown, and Jax was picking it up. He spent the next few days in a state of agitated planning, his mind a whirlwind of increasingly elaborate and aggressive schemes. Mike and Chloe, however, were less enthusiastic. The memory of the burning sensation was still too fresh, the fear of unknown consequences too real. "Look, Jax, I get it. We're pissed," Mike said, nervously picking at a fading red spot on his arm. "But what are we even going to do? Break her? Windows? That's like felony vandalism. We'd actually go to jail." No smashing windows, you idiot," Jax scoffed, though he had briefly considered it. He was sitting cross-legged on his bed, surrounded by a scatter of hastily drawn diagrams and half-formed ideas. "We're smarter than that. We need something that hits her where it hurts, something she can't call the cops about, just like she did to us." Chloe, who had been quiet, finally spoke, her voice still a little shaky. What if she does something worse this time? What if she has actual chemicals? Or what if she's got a gun?" Jax laughed, a brittle, humorless sound. "A gun? Please. She's an old lady, Chloe. She just got lucky with whatever garden." Crap she put in the water. "We need to be subtle, psychological, make her regret messing with us." His plan began to solidify, evolving from crude vengeance to a more calculated campaign of intimidation. It started small, almost imperceptibly. Late one night, Jax, armed with a can of spray paint and a renewed sense of purpose, crept back to Eleanor's property. He didn't deface her house. Instead, he spray-painted the words, "We know," on the inside of her back gate, just visible from her patio. It was a message, direct and unsettling. A silent promise that their previous retreat was not surrender, but a temporary tactical withdrawal. Eleanor found it the next morning as she went to retrieve her newspaper. The words, stark black against the pale wood, sent a jolt through her. "We know." It wasn't vandalism in the conventional sense, nothing to call Deputy Miller about. It was purely psychological. A confirmation that her lesson had been received, but interpreted not as a warning, but as a declaration of war. A familiar tightening in her chest returned, but this time it was laced with a new, sharper edge of concern. They understood she was behind it, and they were escalating. The next incident was even more unnerving. She found a small, dead bird, meticulously placed on her porch swing. Its tiny body was pristine, untouched by scavengers, almost artfully arranged. No note, no message, just the quiet, disturbing presence of death on her doorstep. Eleanor felt a cold tendril of fear curl in her stomach. This wasn't childish mischief. This was a direct personal threat. Arthur would have laughed it off, called it morbid pranks. But Eleanor knew, with a chilling certainty, that this was different. This was meant to unsettle her, to invade her peace in a way that didn't involve physical trespass. She called Deputy Miller again. He arrived looking sympathetic but slightly exasperated. He examined the spray paint on the gate, peered at the dead bird with a grimace. "Mrs. Vance, I understand this is distressing, but a bird, it could be anything. A cat, a hawk. And the spray paint, while irritating, isn't really actionable unless we can prove who did it. And even then, it's minor property damage." "It's a pattern, Deputy," Eleanor insisted, her voice trembling slightly despite herself. "They're escalating. First the pool, then this. They want me to be afraid." Miller sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Mrs. Vance, I'll increase patrols in the area, but honestly, unless there's a direct threat or a more serious crime, our hands are tied." His words, meant to reassure, only solidified Eleanor's growing isolation. The law, her supposed protector, was useless against this new, insidious threat. She was alone. Meanwhile, Jax was reveling in the subtle chaos he was sowing. He loved the idea of Eleanor Vance slowly unraveling, of her perfectly ordered life being chipped away by unseen forces. He imagined her inspecting every corner of her property, jumping at every shadow. That was the real victory. Not just a pool, but her peace of mind. He coerced Mike and Chloe into becoming his unwilling accomplices. "We're a team, remember?" He'd pressured them. "We started this together. We finish it together. Besides, you want to let that old hag think she won, Chloe?" Was clearly uncomfortable. "This is getting creepy, Jax. What if we get caught? What if someone sees us and connects it to the pool incident?" "No one's gonna connect anything," Jax dismissed, his eyes gleaming with a dangerous excitement. "We're smart. We're invisible." His next move was an orchestrated series of phantom calls. He found Eleanor's unlisted number through a rudimentary online search and then, using a burner phone, began calling her house at random, late hours. He wouldn't say anything, just let it ring once or twice, then hang up. Sometimes he'd let it ring until her answering machine picked up, then simply breathe into the receiver, a soft, unsettling whisper of air that held no words, but spoke volumes. Eleanor found herself sleeping fitfully, her ears strained for the sound of the phone, for the subtle creak of a floorboard, for any sign of their presence. The calls started, erratic and silent. The first time, she dismissed it as a wrong number. The second, a telemarketer. But by the third night, a cold certainty settled in. They were watching her, they were listening, and they were inside her head. The silence on the other end of the line was more terrifying than any shouted threat. It was a void, filled only with her own escalating anxiety. One evening, as she sat on her patio, trying to recapture a semblance of normalcy, she saw it. A glint of light from the dense tree line at the edge of her property. Not the flash of a phone, but something more deliberate, a pair of binoculars. They were watching her, actively, patiently watching. Eleanor quickly retreated indoors, pulling the blinds shut. Her heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a glass cage, every move observed, every vulnerability exposed. The next morning, Eleanor woke to an unbearable stench. It permeated the air, a sickly, sweet, decaying odor that made her stomach churn. It was coming from her car. She walked outside, bracing herself, and found it. A large, rotten fish, deliberately placed under the windshield wiper, its scales shimmering with flies. The smell was overpowering, clinging to everything. This was beyond prank. This was an assault on her senses, on her daily life, and it was a clear escalation, a message that no corner of her existence was safe. She stood there, staring at the putrid offering, a wave of nausea washing over her. But beneath the disgust and the fear, something else stirred. A cold, hard anger, far more potent than the initial fury over the pool. They had crossed a line. They were no longer just trespassing in her pool. They were trespassing in her life, her sanity. Eleanor looked towards the tree line, where she imagined Jax and his friends were celebrating their latest act of terror. Her eyes, no longer just sad or fearful, hardened. They wanted a war? She would. Give them one. But she wouldn't fight on their terms. She wouldn't descend into petty vandalism or childish pranks. Eleanor Vance, the quiet widow, was about to unleash a different kind of lesson, one they would never forget. The stench of the rotten fish clung to Eleanor's car, a vile, persistent odor that permeated the air, a physical manifestation of the teenager's malice. But as she cleaned it, scrubbing with a ferocity born of cold fury, her mind wasn't on the putrid smell. It was on Arthur, on his unwavering calm, his strategic mind, his ability to turn every setback into an opportunity. She wouldn't call the police again. Deputy Miller was well-meaning but ineffectual. This fight, she realized, was hers alone, and she would fight it with Arthur's intelligence, not with their juvenile aggression. Her first move was to secure her intelligence. She retrieved the motion-activated camera from the back gate, carefully reviewing the footage. There they were, Jax, Mike, and Chloe, scaling the fence with casual arrogance. The spray painting incident, the bird, the fish, each transgression, captured in grainy black and white, provided her with invaluable data. Their faces, their movements, their patterns. She studied them with the precision of a general analyzing enemy troop movements. She discovered the small, weathered trail they used, a barely discernible path through the thick woods that bypassed her front entrance. It was their secret route, their hidden highway to her home, and it would be their undoing. Eleanor didn't act immediately. Instead, she entered a period of observation. She mapped their habits, their arrival times, their preferred entry points. She watched from her windows, from her hidden vantage points in the garden, a silent, unseen guardian. She saw their bravado, their confident strides, the way Jax would. Sometimes pause, looking at her house with a smirk, as if daring her to respond. She didn't. Not yet. She allowed their confidence to swell, their sense of invincibility to solidify. The higher they climbed, the further they would fall. Her plan wasn't about pain or even direct confrontation. It was about exposing them, about stripping away their anonymity and their sense of consequence-free action. It was about social capital, a currency far more valuable to teenagers than legal repercussions. And she would use the very tools they wielded: observation, infiltration, and the power of subtle, pervasive influence. Eleanor's first target was the local social media sphere. She created a discreet, anonymous online profile, carefully constructed to appear as an innocuous, neighborhood watch type account. Under the guise of Willow Creek community updates, She began posting about local incidents, missing pets, minor traffic delays, anything to establish credibility. She joined local neighborhood groups, silently observing the flow of information, the casual gossip, the anxieties of the parents. She learned about school schedules, local events, and, crucially, the names and reputations of the children in the new development. Jax, she discovered, had a track record of minor troublemaking, but nothing that had ever stuck. Mike was the quiet, easily led one. Chloe, the seemingly bright one, with a burgeoning social media presence of her own, a carefully curated world of selfies and filtered adventures. One afternoon, Eleanor noticed a flyer pinned to a community board at the local grocery store. Willow Creek High School Homecoming Dance, volunteer sign-ups. Below it, a list of parent chaperones, and there, amongst them, was Mrs. Reynolds, Chloe's mother, a woman Eleanor vaguely recognized from town. A faint smile touched Eleanor's lips. The pieces were beginning to fall into place. Eleanor initiated the next phase of her plan, a series of calculated, anonymous actions designed to make their lives incrementally, subtly, uncomfortable. She started by targeting Jax. She'd observed his routine, his morning jog, always past a specific house with an unusually aggressive dog. One day, a carefully timed anonymous call to animal control reported a stray dog creating a nuisance in that exact area. No proof, just a slight delay to Jax's run. A brief, frustrating confrontation with a bewildered animal control officer. Minor, yes, but a crack in his carefully constructed invincibility. Then came the school. Eleanor, using her anonymous online profile, began leaving perfectly worded, seemingly innocent comments on various school forums and community pages. Does anyone know if students are still taking the shortcut through the old Vance property to get to the development? I'm concerned about safety, especially with the recent wildlife sightings. Not an accusation, just a question, a gentle nudge. Parents started to notice, to whisper. The school administration, sensitive to liability, began to put out generic warnings about using designated paths. The shortcut became less attractive, less convenient. Chloe was next. Eleanor had noticed Chloe's obsession with her online persona. Her perfectly filtered photos, her meticulously crafted captions. One day, a particularly embarrassing photo of Chloe, taken years ago at a school carnival, before her braces came off, before she mastered the art of makeup, mysteriously appeared in a comment thread on a popular local Facebook page. A thread discussing throwback photos from school events. No direct malice, just an inconvenient, slightly humiliating reminder of a less glamorous past. Chloe quickly deleted it, but not before a few hundred people had seen it. The carefully constructed facade of online perfection, briefly, subtly, fractured. Mike, the quiet one, was harder to target directly. His life seemed to revolve around his Xbox and his part-time job at the local burger joint. So Eleanor went for his weakest point, his sense of security. She had noticed he always left his car unlocked in his driveway, a casual habit born of a safe, suburban upbringing. One night, while Mike was at work, Eleanor, gloved and silent, walked up his driveway. She didn't steal anything. She didn't break anything. She simply opened his car door, carefully removed his house keys from the ignition, and then replaced them, leaving a small, perfectly folded note on the driver's seat. The note read in elegant looping script, "Some things are better kept locked." Mike found it the next morning. The small white note, the subtle shift in the position of his keys. A cold dread seeped into him. It wasn't just a warning. It was a demonstration. Someone had been inside his car. Someone had been at his house. It wasn't Jax's aggressive, loud tactics. It was silent, pervasive, and utterly terrifying. He started locking his car. He started checking his windows. His easygoing confidence began to erode, replaced by a subtle, constant unease. The cumulative effect began to tell. Jax found himself constantly annoyed by minor, inexplicable inconveniences. Chloe became paranoid about her online image, scrutinizing every comment, every tag. Mike developed a nervous habit of checking his locks, his eyes, darting to shadows that hadn't bothered him before. The carefully cultivated sense of invincibility, of being invisible and untouchable, began to crumble. One evening, Eleanor watched from her living room as Jax and Mike walked past her house. They weren't cutting through her property, but sticking to the sidewalk, their heads down. There was no laughter, no swagger, just a subdued, almost weary silence. Jax stopped, his gaze drawn to her house, to the pool that glittered innocently in the twilight. He stared for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. Not anger, not even fear, but perhaps a nascent understanding. A dawning realization that the game had indeed changed. Eleanor knew this wasn't over. Not yet. But the tide had turned. The hunter had become the hunted, and they were beginning to feel the subtle, chilling pressure of her presence, not as a direct assault, but as a pervasive, inescapable shadow that watched their every move and seemed to anticipate their every thought. The true lesson, the one about consequences and boundaries, was slowly, meticulously being etched into their young, arrogant minds. And Eleanor, the quiet widow, was just getting started.